This is NDTV, and you're watching Classics.
Hello and welcome to the Unstoppable Indians. Every week we take a journey into the life of an outstanding Indian, a person whose talent, acumen or moral example is transforming India. The best, the finest from every field join me, Manvi Dhillon, on this show to share their life story, their journey to success. The knocks along the way, what made them get up and keep going, what makes them an unstoppable Indian. My guest today is an architect, a planner, an activist, a theoretician in a career that spans the design of great buildings, great cities, right up to effective, affordable housing. His achievements, very few can match. He's a major figure in contemporary architecture, not just in India, but around the world. Charles Correa, thank you very much for joining us on the Unstoppable Indians. You know, I'm going to start here in Goa. We're sitting in a home that you have designed, and this place is special to you.
Well, yes, my family's from Goa, but I like this place actually because it's a location on the Mandavi River. That's a beautiful river. I mean, there are two rivers in Goa, and the Zuari is the other one, but this is the historic river. And so I always wanted to have a site on the water, and then luckily there was someone who came along, had the site, and they wanted 30 houses. So we took the two end ones, and I designed them in such a way that everyone has a garden, and then we have a common garden, what's called a back garden, which you can only reach through the houses. And that's beautiful because you can walk up and down along this kind of semi-public, semi-private, a community space, which is very good, and it makes for a community, yeah.
Is there something about this architecture that is almost sort of characteristic of Charles Correa's work?
Well, let me say what I did with it. We just, we used the natural levels of the site, exaggerated them a little bit so that you came down to this point where so as you enter, you're really stepping down to this water. And that's the most compelling thing you can do. Look through a house and see the water ahead of you. Then you don't have to play any tricks. I mean, we just used a tiled roof, simple brick walls and columns. And in fact, if we had played tricks and made an over-ambitious house, it would have killed the site. You had to be very quiet to hear what the site had to say. And that's very important in architecture, to listen to the site, yes.
And I'm going to talk about that, the importance of listening to what the site has to say. But I want to talk about a project that you took on when you were 28 years old, the Gandhi Memorial in Sabarmati. And, you know, people say it's one of the most compelling national monuments in contemporary India and around the world, actually. Do you think it was a child prodigy at work, or it was a moment of genius, or it just all came together?
No, it's the same thing. It's just that was a place where you knew you had to speak. I mean, Gandhiji was not the same as, say, Washington or Nehru. I mean, the Washington Memorial in Washington is a perfect piece of hardware for George Washington. Gandhiji wasn't that kind of person. He was a much more modest man. And we had to do something on a human scale. I knew that. And I knew I would like to use the local materials, the brick and the ladi, the kota stone, etc., which he had used in his own house. But I knew we had to speak with our voice, with our contemporary voices. I don't believe that architecture is kitsch. You don't go back and copy something and then bring it into the 21st century. No, you have to reinvent it in a vocabulary and a syntax which speaks of your time. And that's all we did, actually. It's a very simple thing. Because we kept that human scale, because we kept a kind of meandering pattern. The units joined together in a very casual, with the way the houses in a village. It wasn't consciously done. It just was the mood you wanted. And what I did, which I've done in all the other museums I've designed since then, like the Crafts Museum in Delhi, is have between units which show you something about Gandhiji, have open spaces, partly covered sometimes, where you can think about what you've seen. And that I learned in school, I think, at MIT. One of my professors, who was a painter, Kepish, he said, there's such a thing as museum fatigue. You go to the Louvre and you go through room after room after room. There has to be a point at which you stop and you think about what you saw. The eye can rest and the mind can contemplate. And that's perfect for Gandhiji because it's really a place of scholarship, and we had to establish that mood. So you see, it all comes together. You're working from different directions. You know you want a place of contemplation. You know you want to do, and suddenly, it's rather like a jigsaw puzzle. You suddenly say, gosh, this fit. I know I'm looking for a piece which says this and that, and that's the possibly
and then the
piece.
rest of it just falls.
Yeah, and then
place.
once you make the right decision there, then the rest just designs itself. If
Around.
you start with the wrong idea, then you really have to catch your ear from the side. You have to do all sorts of tricks, but not if you get it right in your first step.
This is such a trite question, but of all the great buildings that you've designed, and you know, the Bhopal State Assembly, the Jawahar Kala Kendra in Jaipur as well, the Gandhi Ashram, there's so many, I could list them all, but is there one that gives you a complete sense of satisfaction? This is Charles Correa.
Well, I mean, there are 3 or 4. They all so. I mean, they look at different issues. I think Kanchenjunga Apartments in Bombay, I like very much. It's a high-rise building, but it's also a piece of sculpture. And I think architecture is sculpture, but with the gestures of human habitation. It's not abstract, and yet it is. But it has to show how human beings are scale. I think another good building is the Gandhi Ashram. There's a building in Jaipur which is it's an art center named after Nehru. It's a beautiful thing. It's based on the mandala, and I'm very proud of that building, though it's not really looked after. That's the sad thing in India, I think, is that we build buildings, and there are lots of other architects too, but you know, we don't look after the buildings we build. I mean, it's not just my silly work. It's even not even just Corbusier. It's even the Taj Mahal.
You know, I'm going to ask you almost a philosophical question here. If you were to say, this is the philosophy behind Charles Correa's architecture, and this I want in your words, what is really that philosophy? We've got a glimpse into it based on our conversation so far, but what is that philosophy?
I would think that, I would say that, I've never thought about it, but that's a nice direct question. I'll have to find an answer. I think that I would say architecture is rooted in the place on which it stands. It's quite unlike music. A great pianist like Rubinstein or Ravi Shankar can take his sitar to New York or to anywhere, or to Tokyo, and play the same Rubinstein would play the same Chopin concert, because music is a movable feast, not architecture. You cannot do the same building in Goa that you would do in, let's say, in Delhi. Why is that? It's because architecture has to deal with the local climate, unlike music. It has to deal with the materials. It has to deal with the culture of that place, with the lifestyle, and with the aspirations. Architecture isn't just about looking backward. I think that's overdone today. Architects deal with the future. They deal with the aspirations of their clients. It's foolish to drag people back. It's because, I'm not saying that heritage is foolish, but it's silly to overemphasize that and not create something from our generation which will become the next generation's heritage, etc. We must speak with our own voices and respect the earlier voices, but speak with your own voice.
Is there a source of inspiration or multiple sources of inspiration that you draw upon when you're embarking on a new project, or is it the site that speaks to you? No,
the site, and of course the program. I mean, you think that if someone says, I want this house, and you'd say, well, you know, they've got 3 children and a dog, and they love music, and then you'd say, if I had 3 children and a dog, and I love music, this is the kind of, and I had this site, this is how I would like to live. But taking into account as much as you can of what you understand about them. I mean, that's a very important determinant, because architecture finally is a thing you must use. So it's not just an abstraction. That's what's wrong in much of the work we see today. It just becomes overly abstract. No, it's an abstraction which is rooted in that place, rooted in that society. Now, if the client suddenly says, no, I want an extra bedroom, then of course you could compromise and just attach it. That would be wrong. I would never do that. I would go back and start from square one. You'd say, oh gosh, now I want 4 bedrooms and only 2 dogs, so this is what I would think I would do. And so you are really, in a sense, listening to the client, but you also are, in another sense, listening to your own inner voice. You are, in a way, your own client, your own agenda.
I'm going to steer you towards the less controlled sort of projects that you've taken on in your life, and that's city planning and the role of planning for our big congested cities. In the 60s itself, you along with two colleagues
Yes,
were involved with the plan
yes.
for New Bombay.
Yeah.
And you live in that city, you know that city. When you look at it today, what do you feel? Is it?
It's very exciting. It's getting to be more and more crowded. As it gets more crowded, actually the intensity of the interaction goes higher and the decibel level, so to speak, which makes it a better city, but worse as a physical place to live. No, but when I think back, I'm glad you thought of that. I'd forgotten about it. In 1964, I think, three of us, just private citizens, all young, about 30, 35 years old, we put out this idea. We said that, look, this first squatters had begun to appear in the early 60s. And it was clear that they were growing faster than the Pakka housing. And we said it's because there's no match, there's a mismatch between demand and supply. There are more people wanting housing, wanting jobs than the supply. Now, therefore, you have to restructure the city. You have to find new places, because as long as you have public transport, people can get to a job. And so that whole idea of New Bombay was to restructure Bombay using that bridge which had come up and the NOSL, the chemical industry there, to open up the line to the hinterland of the state. Now, it's amazing that that idea went through. That after, but it took 6 years, or maybe that's when I started to write and arguing on committees and stuff, and the Maharashtra government did that. So I do think that big ideas too can get through, but then they didn't follow it up the way it should have.
And it should be a continuous process when you're talking about a city like Bombay.
Yeah, it should be continuous at Bombay, and it should be based on public transport. You see the success of Bombay, and this we must understand, it's probably one of the few large cities in the world whose very structure was generated by railway lines.
I'm changing so many tracks here, but you've worked overseas as well so much, and the affordable housing in Peru is, of course, one of those projects that mid-career comes to mind. What's it like working in another country? I mean, you know, we've talked about how architecture is culturally rooted. So when an Indian goes to Peru or to the United States, how does he build those roots and then go about designing?
Well, first of all, I haven't built in so many countries. I've built about 3 or 4 projects abroad. The one in Peru I could relate to because it was about low-cost housing. And Peru is also a developing country. It has a climate very much like we do on the West Coast. And it was quite easy to do that. I wouldn't be able to do housing, let's say, in some other country, well, in Canada, let's say, easily. The other ones I've done, I've always built in a place which spoke to me, which I knew something about, like Boston. I mean, I studied at MIT, so I know that place, and I know what you can do and what you can't do. And New York, of course, I've never lived there, but I've visited it. And now I'm doing a building in Toronto for the Aga Khan, and it's much tougher because I don't know Toronto. I mean, know it in this sense. When we built our house in Bangalore some years ago, I wanted to put the veranda on front. Then I realized I'd never seen someone in Bangalore sitting on their veranda because it's so clammy and cold. People don't do it, whereas in Goa you hardly ever see a balcony without seeing 2 people sitting there looking at the traffic going by. You have to have that real experience of the place to work as you're drawing, to realize, no, that's wrong, my hand's taking me to a wrong place. And I think that is very sad, because today architects are building wherever they get a commission, and we destroy our own talent, because unless you listen to that inner voice, you're going to design off the top of your head. What does that mean? I mean, no poet would write a poem off the top of his head, or no painter, so why? We mustn't do that.